Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you remember from last time, I was saying that now that I've done the big 10-month, almost a year's worth wrap up, it's time to do a wrap up of all the things that I've read since I did that last wrap up. So that's what we're going to do today. It is vaguely a summer 2018 wrap up of the books that I read pretty much over the summer months. And like my last wrap up, I'm going to do it in categories of genre. So I'm going to start off with speculative fiction, so sci-fi and fantasy. This is going to be both YA and adult fiction. The first one that I read was Cruel Prince by Holly Black. I think I have a physical copy of this, but I'm not sure exactly where it is. And this is a continuation of Holly Black's books about fairies. This is the first in a new trilogy, and I really like the way that Holly Black writes fairies. They're very alluring, but also very dangerous. Since this is the first book, a lot of it did kind of feel like setup. It's basically about these twin sisters who are fully human, and then they have a half-fairy older sister, and basically her father, her fairy father, comes to basically reclaim his daughter, ends up killing both their parents and taking all three of the children back to fairyland with him, so they've grown up under the care of this fairy father. So the main character is one of the twins, and she has had to really watch her step growing up in fairyland because a lot of the fairies are very capricious, they can't really be trusted, they're often dangerous, they like to use humans as playthings, and there is also this prince who's third in line for the throne, so it's unlikely that he's ever going to be the king, but he is very vicious, and she finds herself at the end of his taunting a lot. So once I finished this one, I then went back and read her very first series about fairies, which was Tithe, Valiant, and Ironside. These ones felt very much like an earlier series, it was clear that she was still finding her footing. These are also very clearly written in the mid-2000s, but I did overall really enjoy the series. This one's kind of reverse of her newer series where it's a girl who thinks that she is all human, finds out that she is actually a pixie fairy changeling child. And she kind of knew that the world of fairy existed because she had these little sprite friends as a child, but she didn't know that it was this whole intricate court system, and she gets drawn into the politics, and there's an overthrow of multiple courts. One of the things that I did really like about Cruel Prince now in retrospect is that some of the main characters in the Tithe series show up as side characters in the Cruel Prince series, so they're clearly in the same world. And so I'm definitely curious to see when the Cruel Prince series continues how those two interweave. I think that'll be really cool. So the next series that I read was actually a reread for me. This is the Spirit Walker trilogy by Kate Elliott. It goes Cold Magic, Cold Fire, and Cold Steel. This is just absolutely one of my favorite fantasy series ever. I think the world building is beyond compare. It is an alternate fantasy history version of our world where magic exists. There's been an extended ice age. The dynamics between a bunch of empires are really shifted from our history. And there's also elements of Celtic mythology, there's elements of African mythology. It's such a diverse world. Most of the characters are people of color because the history that she's built in is that powerful Africans emigrated from Africa into Europe and ended up mixing with the mage houses in Europe. The main character is a girl named Kat, and she has a cousin Beatrice, and basically they are living what they think are just normal merchant lives. And then a mage house shows up and says that their family made a deal that they could claim the eldest daughter of the family for marriage. And it's basically a magically bound marriage. And so Kat, who is the eldest in the household, gets married off to this powerful, disdainful, cold mage and gets whisked away into this whole other adventure. The romance that buds between Kat and her husband Andavai is so phenomenally good. The relationship between Kat and Beatrice is really strong and lovely. Kat ends up finding out a lot more about her family, and there are other family members that get pulled in, and the characters are so much fun and so real, and the world building and history is so cool that I could go on about this series for ages. Next up is City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. This one I liked okay. It's definitely part of a series, and I think I probably will read the series. I read this one a while ago, though, and it didn't super stick in my mind. There's basically this city that is run by magic users and people that are maybe you would describe as elementals, and Basically, this girl finds out that she thinks she's human, but it turns out that she's part deva, I think is the word, which is sort of like demon, sort of like magical creature. And she gets whisked away to this city that ends up having all of these political struggles between like humans or people that are more like humans and people that are more like elementals or spirits. I've kind of forgotten the intricacies of the political dealings and all of the different factions, but it was really interesting. I also ended up doing a reread of Foxglove Summer by Ben Aronovich. This is book 5, I believe, in the Rivers of London series. This is one where he ends up leaving London for the first time and having to go on a case of missing children, and it ends up turning out that like fairies might have something to do with it. This series is really fun. It's magical crime solving. Peter Grant is a magician apprentice who is also a police officer. And I definitely recommend checking out the series. I also recommend checking it out on audiobook because I could listen to that narrator read the phone book. So I also read Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. I have read Laini Taylor's previous series, and I did enjoy it. I had kind of mixed feelings about it, where I felt like the first book was really weak, and then it really picked up later on. So this one is super weird. She definitely has a thing for angels, because they featured in, like, every series that she's written so far. But basically, there, like, were these gods that were murdered, but they, like, had this reign of terror over the city for centuries. And now there's, like, a few remaining children that managed to escape the slaughter, but they're, like, isolated in this citadel. This book has a lot going on with it. Strange is the name of the main character, or one of the main characters. I think it's told in 2 different perspectives. Strange is this assistant librarian who gets really caught up in stories of this city, and then the other main character is one of the children of the gods who is hiding out in the citadel. This book has one more. I believe it's only a duology. I will definitely be reading that second book because I do really want to know how this series ends. Okay, so the next book that I finished was Obsidio. This actually finishes off the Illumine series. I did really like this book. However, I do still think that Illumine, the very first book, is still my favorite. It's the one that really managed to get me emotionally. Like, it was really creepy. It had a lot of elements to it that I was really, really taken in. And I felt like with the next 2 books, I could kind of see their patterns starting to repeat themselves. Like, there were a lot of narrative beats that were the same. They never really managed to get as scary for me as the first one did, because I felt like the virus in the first novel is just so menacing and creepy that I don't think it ever really quite matched that level. However, it is still a really good series, and I think it ends in a way that is really satisfying. So if you have been reading the series, it is definitely worth finishing. I just personally still think that the first book is my favorite one. Okay. Sorry about that. Camera battery died, and then I lost the light. So next up is what I consider to be one of the most exciting releases of the year. It is Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is a Native American post-apocalyptic urban fantasy. Basically, there was a giant climate apocalypse, and the Navajo reservation is now a new nation called, I think it's pronounced Dinétah. I don't speak Navajo, so I might be wrong about that. And basically, magic has reawoken. They're now sealed off from the rest of the world by a magical wall that erected itself. Their traditional gods and monsters have started coming back, and the main character is a woman who basically works as a mercenary monster hunter to track down monsters that have interfered with humans. So she starts by trying to find a little girl, and then ends up getting involved with a medicine man named Kai. They have a really cool relationship. He is very young and laid back and fashionable, and she is very not having any of his shit. I think that the world is super cool. I don't know a whole lot about Navajo mythology, so this was really cool to get a taste of that. And I just love the way that this story is going. Obviously, this is the first in a series. The rest of the series is not out yet, but as soon as it comes out, this is one I'm keeping my eye on because I'm really into this so far. So next up is another fun, weird fantasy book. It is 3 Parts Dead by Max Gladstone. This one is about wizard lawyers. which, yes, is weird and fantastic. The whole series apparently is very non-chronological. Like, the publishing order does not match the series timeline order. So this was the first one published, but it is not the first in the chronological series of the world. However, I prefer generally to read things in publishing order, so that's how I'm doing it for this one. So the wizard lawyers usually end up negotiating contracts between gods and their followers, an exchange of worship for power, and that needs to be regulated apparently, which is fantastic. So the world of this is super interesting and cool. There's a whole mystery aspect because one of the gods, the major patron of a city, has died, and they need to figure out how he died and try to stop the city from devolving into chaos now that their god is dead. Super fun plot. I'm definitely going to be checking out the rest of this series. Wizard Lawyers is a really good time. So next up is another reread series for me. It was the Darkest Minds trilogy. I was sort of inspired to do this by the movie that came out over the summer. I know that the movie did not go over super well. A lot of people didn't seem to really like the movie. I thought that the movie was okay. I thought that it was kind of a rush job in that a lot of things in the book that are way more nuanced and interesting came off as a little bit hackneyed and cliche in the movie. I think that they focused on the romance between Ruby and Liam a little bit more than some other things in the book, and the romance between Ruby and Liam is really good in the books, but there's so much other stuff happening. Like, I would not describe the series as a romance. It is a post-apocalyptic dystopia that has a romance subplot, but the romance subplot doesn't take over the narrative the way that it does in a lot of young adult post-apocalyptic dystopias. So if you haven't read the book but you saw the movie and weren't super impressed, please give the series another shot and try the books, because I promise you there's so much more to them than what the movie showed. I don't know if it did well enough that they're gonna make another one. I kinda doubt it. So I'm a little disappointed by that, but honestly, guys, trust me that the books are so much better. So I did also continue my Harry Potter reread, finally. I started a reread of this, I think, January of last year, 2017, and it has taken me this long to get back to it because I finished Goblet of Fire and then stalled out because Order of the Phoenix is my least favorite of all of the books. However, I finally finished Harry Potter and Order of the Phoenix. A lot of people, when I say that this one is my least favorite one, they're like, oh, because Harry's so whiny, right? And I'm like, no, it's more that Harry is traumatized by watching a schoolmate, a classmate, get murdered in front of him, then be tortured by Voldemort, have him rise from the dead, and then, you know, go back home and no one believes him and all the adults in his life are failing him and he's basically just having a traumatic breakdown. It's not that he's annoying and obnoxious, it's that he's traumatized and no one's doing anything about it. So yeah, still not my favorite book. I think I can appreciate parts of it more now that I'm an adult. However, fuck Snape. He is a teacher who uses his position of power to abuse children. No. So the last for the speculative fiction section, which is the largest one, is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. I had heard a lot about this one. It got a lot of buzz. I was not super impressed, unfortunately. I felt like the characters were, one, there was too many of them, and two, they did not get really well developed, partly because there were too many of them. I also felt like this book doesn't really have a plot. It's more a series of chronological vignettes. And that's fine in its own way, but it just wasn't really what I was looking for. I also felt a lot of the time that the characters were doing a lot of like diversity jazz hands and a lot of purity politics went into the writing, to the point where they weren't super interesting because they didn't have good flaws to them, because it was like the author was so intent on writing like good people, capital letters, that she forgot to really make them people who are not always perfect and who, you know, don't have the perfect answer for everything all the time. I thought that there were elements about the world that were interesting. I've also heard that future books have fewer characters that are more developed and there's more of an actual plot. So I might check out the rest of the series. However, I don't feel like it gets off to the best start in this one. I only have one nonfiction, so before I get to the rest of the like romance and just like literature section, I am going to talk about Hidden Figures, which I did on audiobook. It is read by one of my favorite audiobook readers, Robin Miles. I had seen the movie, obviously. I mean, I feel like most of the country saw the movie, and I loved the movie, but it was so interesting to read the book because, you know, as a movie, as a piece of entertainment, it has to slim things down, it has to cut some things out, it has to simplify like some of the characters. Like there were things that happened to a different person historically that ended up happening to some of the main characters in the movie, but it just would have been too complicated to like include all of these different people. However, in a nonfiction book, you can actually go into all those people. And so it was great to know about the people that we saw in the movie and then the people that we didn't see in the movie and how much they all contributed. And we also got more of the history behind it, like how they started in World War II, mostly working on airplanes and like fighter planes, and then eventually it transitioned into spaceflight. So I definitely recommend both. I think that the movie is a great piece of entertainment about a piece of history that we don't know a whole lot about, and I think the book gives you a clearer, more rounded picture of the time period and the history leading up to the actual events of the movie. So next up is romance. I've only got two of these. The first is Once Upon a Marquis by Courtney Balan. This is one of her like Regency historical romances. I've read quite a few of hers, and so sometimes I get the plots mixed up. I can't quite remember which one this one was. I think this is the one where the main woman like used to belong to a more like gentry family and they've fallen on hard times. Their parents are dead. She's having to like raise these siblings as if they're her children and on very limited money. And I don't remember anything about the dude. Yeah, no, it's all gone. It's all gone. I think he's like an old family friend, but honestly, it's all gone. However, the fact that I can't remember it doesn't mean it wasn't enjoyable. I really enjoy Courtney Balan's books in general. She writes really fun characters. She manages to delve into the history and make it romantic without whitewashing all of the historical injustices of the time period. And I think that that's a really tricky balance to maintain, and I think that she does it really well. The other romance is on a slightly different note. It is Keeping Her Secret by Sarah Nicholas. This is a kind of young adult romance novel about these two girls who used to be best friends and then haven't seen each other in years because they, again, I've kind of forgotten some of the details. I think they like hooked up when they were younger and then they haven't seen each other for years, and now they're meeting back up at camp and their feelings are unresolved. I did like that one of the main characters actively and vocally identifies as bisexual. This book takes place at summer camp, and since I did go to summer camp, I have a lot of nostalgia for stories that take place at summer camp. It's a very sweet little love story of these two, you know, teenager-ish, I think maybe they're like 17, 18, finding each other, and one of them is more coming to terms with her sexuality and one of them is super comfortable with her sexuality and just sort of figuring each other out. Okay, so the final category is just the like straight literature fiction. So we're starting with Scylla the Deep by Adrienne Young. This one was compared to Vikings, the TV show. I definitely see why. It's basically about warring Norse tribes people, and the main girl is in battle against their like centuries old enemy, and she sees her brother on the side of the enemy, and she's thought her brother was dead for years. She ends up getting captured by the enemy tribe and has to like come to terms with her brother, has to come to terms with the fact that this enemy tribe, they're just like us, who knew? And basically end up trying to heal the centuries old feud between these two tribes. She is definitely a warrior character. She is very fierce, does not have a lot of super emotional awareness, I would say. She's very much like, there's a problem, kill the problem. This book was good. I don't really think I thought it was great. I think I gave it around like a 3-star marking, but it was really enjoyable. If you did like the show Vikings, you'll probably like this book because the main girl is very much that like hardened warrior woman character. The next book is Crazy Rich Asians by Kevin Kwan. I read this in preparation for the movie coming out. I have to say, I actually think the movie does the story better because the book is talking about people who are very superficial, but I also felt that the writing itself was very superficial. There's not a lot of emotional depth shown to anyone. A lot of people kind of feel like cardboard cutouts that he's just sort of moving around to create drama. There's a lot of just like descriptions of really lavish lifestyle, and a lot of the actual narration came across as kind of clunky. So I thought that the book was fun in a kind of trashy, good times kind of way, but I thought that the movie really brought it up to another level. It got amazing actors, it was really, really funny. It did little tweaks to the story that I felt like it kind of needed, and I thought that the movie was just a triumph. So the book series is fun. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how the movie series keeps going, and I probably will read all the books just so that I know what they've changed about them. And they're definitely a fun, like, beach read, vacation read. If you're just in the mood for something light and fluffy and a little bit ridiculous, then it is definitely a fun time. So next up is Retribution Rails. This is another historical. It is the companion to Vengeance Road, I think, by Aaron Bowman. These are westerns set in Arizona. Is that so? You coming in? Hello. Hello. And now you want out. Okay. This one has a different main character to the first novel, and the plot of the first novel is this kind of myth that has percolated amongst the societies. There are 2 characters, I've forgotten everyone's name, but she is trying to escape from her uncle, who's basically taking over the business that her father ran, and her father was a decent, hardworking businessman, but her uncle is just like a swindler and a crook. And the main boy character of the series has been unwittingly pulled into a gang when he was very young, and he's basically been looking for a way to get out ever since. They end up meeting. There's a whole plot line about the railroads. There are some characters from the first book that show up in the second one. I think that this series does a really good job at mixing actual history with this story that she's created. I think it does a really good job of portraying the West and Arizona in this time period as diverse as it actually was at the time. And I think it does a really interesting look and portrayal at vengeance and at grief, and the way that violence can come out of that grief and the need for retribution. Hey. So the next one I talked about a little bit in my booktubeathon video. It is Land of the Blindfolded. Smudge, must you rub your face on the tripod? Must you? No, God. Yeah, he just knocked over the light. Must you? Get out. Okay. This is a really sweet series. Technically, I think this could have gone in sci-fi fantasy because there are some magical realism elements to it. Because the main girl has a gift where when she touches people, sometimes she is able to see little glimpses of their future. And she meets a boy who is able to touch people and sometimes objects and get a glimpse of their past. However, the actual plot and action of this series is so grounded in the real world that it doesn't really feel like a fantasy series, even though it technically is. But it's just really, really sweet. The 2 of them are so cute together. They have a great friendship group with other people. There's sort of a love triangle, but it gets resolved in a way that is really lovely because they meet another boy who is also able to see the future, and they have this understanding of each other because they're the only people that they know that can do this. But there's just this lovely feeling of finding each other and finding your people. I have read this series before. I'm probably going to do a full reread of it. I just haven't gotten past volume 1 yet. It's kind of a short series. It's only 9 volumes, and each volume takes like half an hour, 45 minutes to read. So yeah, definitely worth checking out if you have the time, because it's just so charming. So, second to last on the list, we're almost there, is Trouble Makes a Comeback by Stephanie Tromley. I read Trouble is a Friend of Mine, I think a couple years ago now, and I've had Trouble Makes a Comeback on my shelf for quite a while. This is a really fun series. It's very much teen detective solving, kind of in the vein of Veronica Mars. It has some allusions to Veronica Mars in the first book, so the author was definitely aware that she was doing a sort of homage. I kind of thought that this book was going to end the series, but it turns out that there's another book after it, so I think she's going for a full trilogy. So I'm a little sad because I thought that I was going to get a full conclusion. However, this one is full of hijinks. It is really fun. And now that I know that there's another one coming, I really hope to see how this series ends, because I have gone too far to come back. Even if Digby, the main character, the teen detective, is sometimes so infuriating that I want to throw him against a wall. However, everyone knows that this is true of him. The narrative does not make this any kind of secret. And this series is kind of ridiculous, but in a really fun, engaging way. So the last book that I'm talking about in this video is My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. This is book 1 of the Neapolitan novels. It seems like everyone has at least heard of these. They really took the world by storm a couple years ago. I think the series finished a couple years ago. It's basically meant to be one novel that has then been divided into 4, I think, different actual publications. So this one is very much part 1 of a continuous story. It doesn't really have a resolution at the end of it because it's not really supposed to. I haven't quite decided yet if I'm going to keep reading the series or not. I definitely think that it's interesting. It's set in 1950s Naples, so very much trying to recover from World War II. Everyone's trying to sort of deal with the fact that many of the people they knew were fascists, and there's a lot of social turmoil going on. There's a lot of poverty in Naples, and these 2 girls are heading on very different paths, even though they stay best friends. Although I felt that they were more like frenemies. They have a really fluid and sometimes really contentious and sometimes really supportive and sometimes kind of destructive relationship. And it felt like it went back and forth a lot. So I'm definitely intrigued by the setting, by the main characters. I just haven't decided if it's going to be worth going through all of the different books to get the full story. However, that is going to be the end of my summer reading wrap-up. The reason it got so dark so quickly, even though it is not even 5 o'clock yet, is because I am in California and it is smokepocalypse out there. I don't know if you guys are aware, but my state is currently on fire. I am fine. However, the air outside is extremely unhealthy. It looks like fog. It is not. It is smoke. However, we carry on. Let me know what you guys have been reading and enjoying down in the comments, and I will see you guys soon with another video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye! In or out, Smudge? Everywhere.